Max Keiser, and this is the Keiser Report. I'm here with Stacy Herbert, and this is Summer Solutions. Every year, we try to dig into the solutions, and we've got a special guest today, Jim Kunstler of Kunstler.com, Stacy.
Right. Remember, James was a guest on our series Front Running. So at that time, we were looking at all of the radical platforms of the various candidates for the Democratic presidential nomination. And they were radical things like UBI, MMT, and all sorts of other ideas. Well, they've all become basically law now. We all have them implemented. So we're going to talk to him about a few of these. But Jim, welcome to Summer Solutions.
Pleasure to be with you both.
Will the money printing continue until morale improves? And just how much more can morale improve anyway? Like stock markets are at all-time highs, housing prices soaring, wages are at all-time highs. So, like, how much more money printing are we going to endure?
Happy is America now. It kind of depends on how worthless the money becomes as the punishments of money printing continue. And I think we can probably all agree that there's a great hazard in printing no end of money with quotation marks around it, because it's becoming increasingly detached from any real productive activity in the on the ground economy.
I remember back during the time of FDR, there was a lot of money printing going on, but there was also a big works program. So people were out there working and building and infrastructure and bridges and roads. But this time they're just printing in money and giving it to folks, and they're not expecting anything in return. And we're getting a lot of inflation, but we're not getting anything done, Jim.
Let's remember that even back during the 1930s and the Great Depression, that notwithstanding the high rates of unemployment, we still had a great deal of productive infrastructure, and we were still, in fact, producing a great deal of value and goods and things of worth. And you know, what we had could still be classified as something like real industrial growth. The problem that we have now, especially with the shenanigans of the central banks, is that we're entering a period of history of non-growth and the reversal of growth. And if you don't have that thing called growth, you don't produce enough surplus wealth to service the debts that you're piling up. And now that we're piling up the debts at a kind of astronomical hockey stick path, we're guaranteeing that we're going to have a debt system in which there's no expectation that debt ever gets paid back, which is not a credible debt system. And that's kind of the hinge of the problem.
So we're kind of going through a period as well of deglobalization, or certainly tensions between the rising power and the declining power, and the declining power of the United States and everybody else, essentially, including Europe. So will that be a solution in a way to the problem with especially the Rust Belt and all of the people who Hillary declared were deplorables, people who used to have jobs and manufactured wealth and had great jobs and stuff like that? Like, will that be a solution for them?
Solution is a bit of a tricky word because we must remember that reality has mandates of its own. Reality compels us to have to endure certain conditions. And one of the conditions that we're being asked to endure now is the withering and reorganizing of international trade. You could call that the global economy. You know, there's going to continue to be exchanges between nations, but you know, the power differentials are going to change, not just in the ability to project force, but the ability to project economic domination and power. And that's now changing a great deal. And I think the bottom line is that for the West, the world is going to become a bigger place again, rather than the smaller place that, you know, when Tom Friedman published the Lexus and the Olive Tree, he made the point that globalism was going to become a permanent installation of the human condition. And that's proving not to be exactly true. And now that it's withering, we are facing a new disposition of things, including basically a lower standard of living for the Western advanced economies. And probably in the United States, considerably lower than what we've been used to. And we're trying desperately to compensate for that by printing all this money to pay for the stuff, to pay for the standard of living we have now, which is actually leaving us behind.
The ability to add value in a manufacturing economy and very export-led economies shrinks, what it sounds like you're saying there. And so global standards of living deteriorate as everything becomes kind of commodified. And there is no, I guess, David Ricardo's sense of competitive advantage amongst nations. It just becomes one big global commodified goo.
Commodified musical chairs, maybe. Where we're constantly shifting around in the circle of futility, trying to keep ahead of everybody else, when in fact the general pool of what's available is shrinking. And the most crucial part of that is the energy pool. And we've discussed this before. I'm kind of I regard the energy inputs to the economy as being central and crucial. And we're facing the situation now. The shale oil miracle, which was supporting American energy production at a very high level, was already being challenged before COVID-19 hit. And the main problem with the shale oil miracle was that they spent 10 years jacking up production of oil to a tremendous level, much higher than the previous 1970 peak. But at the same time, they were proving that they couldn't make any money doing it. And so they had gotten all this tremendous amount of investment in the 10 years after the 2009 great financial emergency. And now that they've demonstrated that they can't make money producing all this shale oil, they can't get additional investment to continue those operations, which have to be continually re-upped and re-upped, because this is a resource that depletes so rapidly. The average shale oil well loses 60% of its mojo after the first year and is generally out of business after 4 years. So they have to constantly re-drill and refrac. These are tremendously costly operations. The old oil cost $400,000 in today's money to drill an oil well, and it was like a cash register that ran for 30 years. The shale wells, cost between $6 and $12 million per well to drill, and they start crapping out after the first year at 60% of loss. So it's unfortunately a loser game, and we got a lot of it allowed us to postpone our problems, our reckonings with energy, but now that's over. And, it's coincided with the terrible destruction of the COVID-19, the reaction to the virus. And it's placed us in a great deal of peril.
The absurdity of fracking, as you said, it kept on losing money. And our pointing it out, of course, saw our program be mentioned, and the whole director of national intelligence was saying that was somehow us saying that somehow caused Hillary to lose the election in 2016. But nevertheless, it was possible because of 0% interest rates. It was possible because of the exorbitant privilege of the US dollar. So, James, tell me, the US dollar turns 50 in August. As we know it, the all fiat global reserve standard, no backing by gold, no need to send our gold overseas due to our huge trade deficit. Does it survive much longer? How much longer can this live? Are we going to, the elite enjoy the exorbitant privilege, but the majority seem not to have any sort of privilege off of this at all. The
financial economy has been detaching from the real on-the-ground economy during that whole period, and it's become especially extreme over the last few years, really the last 10 years, since the central bank started messing around with exorbitant money creation from nowhere. Now that the amount of creation has become just out of this world, going from annual deficits of less than $1 trillion a year to now something like, I think the U.S. budget is like $10 trillion this year, including all of the, the various rescue plans of this kind and that kind. $10 trillion a year out of nowhere, where you just can't match that with the production of real wealth. That means that your financial system is completely abstracted from real economic activity. And that tends to suggest that you're going to harm your currency. So I would be of the group that believes that the currency is going to be damaged sooner rather than later. And, look, we're seeing it already in the price of cars. I think the average price of a car is over $30,000 now, just in the last year. You go to the supermarket, there's not a single item that's under $4, including a jar of peanut butter. And, we're seeing it. But, the old saying goes, there's two ways of going broke. You can have no money, or you can have plenty of money that's not worth anything. And we seem to be choosing that, the second one, because it's easier for the authorities to get away with that. And by the way, the whole modern monetary theory that this exorbitant money printing and spending and fiscal spending is based on, it represents kind of the final horizon of detachment from being real, from having a real economy. I don't think we're going to get beyond MMT.
All right, that's incredible. We're going to pick this up in part 2 with Jim Kunstler. Don't go away. Welcome back to the Keiser Report with Max Keiser, Stacy Herbert, and James Howard Kunstler. We're going to pick up where we left off in our Summer Solutions conversation with James. James, it seems that all this money printing now, really, it's taken on a different character. People aren't really expecting there to be genuine growth. It feels more like palliative care in a hospice. I feel as though America's become a giant hospice, and the money printing is to ease our pain as we essentially commit financial suicide.
That's a very good way of putting it, and nobody else has put it that way. Very interesting. If you really want to talk about solutions, I think that the best way to go with that is probably for Americans to somehow wrap their minds around the following dynamic. It's not that complicated. Reality is sending us this message about, what kind of conditions we're going to be meeting of, resource scarcity and capital scarcity. And the real message is to get smaller, to get more local, to downscale the gigantism of the things that we do. For example, we've got a nation that is now relying almost solely on super duper giant corporations to deliver goods that are, made 12,000 miles away. If you really want to have an economy, you've got to employ people where you live. Also, along with that, you've got to have people who occupy not only economic but social niches in your community, so that they play different roles in your community, so that you actually have a society that has some dimension to it, not just a society of consumers who are like Pac-Men, going across the board, gobbling up cheese doodles. So to rebuild that kind of economy is going to be a tremendous task. I think we're going to be forced into it by necessity, whether we like it or not. We're going to be dragged kicking and screaming into rebuilding our local economies, making something, even if it ends up occurring at a lower kind of standard of living than what we're used to, because, the human project has to go on, including the American version of it. And this is going to be quite an emergency that we're going to have to really put our shoulders to the wheel through and somehow bull our way through.
I have a question about that, because can we get there from here? Because it seems like we would need a civil society as well. We would need to have adult conversations between these various tribes in America. It does seem like, I've never seen it like this before. sure, there were problems in the 60s and 70s, but it was like the people against the government, essentially. And now it's like the government with one set of people, the elites, the cable news hosts and think tankers, against the deplorables. So how can you ever even want to how can we get to the point where they bring manufacturing or wealth creation or hiring local if you think most Americans are deplorable and that they're white supremacists and horrible people? So how do we get to the point where we want to help them?
I think you're describing what I would call the woke hysteria, which has become a tremendous interruption in our history and in our national life. And I would look at it this way, that, when you're in an economy and a society that is under tremendous stress and is generating a huge amount of anxiety and uncertainty, the society is going to respond by doing crazy things. And this happens in history. We had the medieval hysterias, and, we have all kinds of tremendous social upsets when things like this happen. So, we're just going to have to probably wait it out. I think that it's liable to kind of solve itself because hysterias tend to burn themselves out. This one has quite a resemblance to the Jacobin rebellion in the latter stages of the French Revolution, where the Jacobins come along in 1793, and they're really quite crazy. This is Robespierre and Saint-Just and that whole gang. And they start to impose all these crazy new social conditions on the population. They say, you're not going to have the Catholic Church anymore. We're going to have the worship of the great spiritual being. You're not going to have a 7-day week anymore. You're going to have a 10-day week. We're going to change all the names of the months of the year. And this went on for about a period of 11 months. And finally, the French people just turned around and said, wow, we've had enough of this. You guys are out of here. And they cut off Robespierre's head. And that was the end of the Jacobinism. And, the world didn't hear about them again, after that. That was it. Well, different versions of them sort of rebounded and came back in the form of, let's say, the Leninists in 1917. And the Nazis, but periodically you get these hysterias, and they're a product of this tremendous anxiety that is caused by a culture that seems and fears that it's going to lose so much stuff of value to them, including, their whole way of life, their daily routines, their ability to pay for their shelter and their food. These are very crucial things. And the COVID-19 emergency actually ruined a lot of households. And, I suppose that's causing just a tremendous amount of pain and suffering out there. And a lot of those aren't the wokesters, because the wokesters tend to be the people who are doing better, and they want to teach us all tendentious moral lessons about how to live right. And, it's becoming extremely tedious. I've lost a lot of friends over this, and, I hear that other people have too. And so I don't think that sentiment has been more divided in this country since the Civil War. I hope it doesn't get to that. The bottom line of what we're talking about now is simply this, is under these conditions, expect a lot of disorder, of one kind or another, whether it's financial disorder, the bottom falling out of the dollar, or social disorder, riots and looting, or intellectual disorder, being asked to believe things that are palpably untrue, or even disorder in science, or the science, as we're calling it lately, where, the scientific authorities present ideas as being truthful, and we find out 9 months later that they're not. And that's a terrible blow to the intellectual life of the country. So a lot of disorder. And I think that people discount that and don't pay sufficient attention to the potential for that.
What you're describing there is, a breakdown of institutions, right? Education, religious, social institutions. But I guess because in the last 30 or 40 years, every bright spark in the box has gravitated to Wall Street. Right? People don't go into education anymore. They become quants at a hedge fund. People don't believe in God anymore. They believe in Wall Street as America's Vatican. We pray to the likes of Jamie Dimon as our God. So we have no underlying fundamental institutions anymore. We only have greed.
The problem with everybody, with half a brain trying to go to Wall Street to make a gazillion dollars is that it represents essentially racketeering, which is racketeering is defined as, making money dishonestly. And unfortunately, that's now infected all of these institutions. And ironically, two of the worst places that it's infected are education and medicine. And, both of them have they are fields of or sectors of our daily life that have very high ideals and aspirations. In medicine, the whole point is to do no harm. And in education, the idea is to search for the truth. And we've got racketeering going on in medicine that's so bad that nobody wants to really go to the hospital anymore because they know they're going to come out bankrupt, if not harmed even further medically. And the colleges are now doing two kinds of racketeering. They're racketeering the college loan system, and they're engaging in intellectual racketeering by presenting fields of study that are unreal and that are religious fantasias. So they've both rendered themselves to be failures, and you can't have this kind of intense failure, institutional failure in a culture, and hope to survive intact.
Well, we're also kind of like idiocracy, heading towards idiocracy at a time when, as you mentioned, like a lot of these institutions are collapsing, our economy is, we're being outcompeted. We're like getting rid of, like, states like California are getting rid of advanced math because they're, it was like they said white supremacy, even though most of the students were actually Asian who were getting into the advanced math classes. Things like that, like, it just doesn't make any sense. But the whole racketeering as well, like in this new infrastructure bill, or maybe it's in the $6 trillion budget, who knows? But in there's something like between 50 and 100 billion. None of it's ever transparent or open or discussed, but there's like 100 billion to build for the chip manufacturers, to build semiconductor chips.
The bottom line of racketeering is that it's simply dishonest.
Yes.
And and so what we're seeing is a society that is absolutely pervasively dishonest, that can't tell itself an honest story, that can't discharge real justice, that can't that never accepts any consequences for the things that it does. And that's just extremely dangerous. But I must say, in the case of medicine and education, the solutions are there, but they're a little unappetizing because, once again, they're going to be mandated by reality, not by our wishes and our preferences. And the way that'll shake out is this: the system of higher education is going to collapse. A lot of colleges are going to go out of business, and universities are going to downsize drastically, even the state universities. And in medicine, you're going to see the complete collapse of the, amalgamated hospital insurance rackets. And that's going to devolve by necessity into local clinical care.
That's what I'm saying with these semiconductor chips is healthcare is a racket, and therefore the government ends up paying for Medicare, Medicaid. They have to pay for it all because nobody could afford it. The same thing with education. Okay, nobody could afford it. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, trillions over the whole population. They want to wipe those debts out because nobody could pay them. The same thing with the semiconductor chips is like Intel spent $100 billion on share buybacks. Instead of innovation and building factories, they turned down Steve Jobs when he came to them with the iPhone. So it's a total racket. And what's going to happen instead? Well, the government, the taxpayer, has to come forward again to bail out the semiconductor chip thing, because our whole structure, everything is a lie, as you say.
Well, yeah. And, one of the main ideas in my long emergency book that came out quite a while ago, was the idea that as this long emergency gained traction, one of the manifestations would be that the federal government would become increasingly ineffectual and impotent and unable to discharge its obligations or fulfill its promises. And I think we're seeing that climax now in the extravagant promises of, giving billions of dollars to keep existing rackets going that are already, dishonest, that aren't really working. For example, the one you just mentioned about education, they seek to wipe clean the college debt slate, right? But why? So they can continue a new round of debt and a new round of, running education exactly the same way. Reality is that we're not going to keep most of these rackets, or maybe any of these rackets, going. We're going to have to rearrange daily life and the activities of daily life, and we're going to have to reconstruct real communities, and it's going to be very hard. It's going to be attended by a certain amount of disorder, and we're just going to have to grit our teeth and get through it.
Wow, blistering. Jim Kunstler of Kunstler.com. Thanks for being on Summer Solutions.
A pleasure to be with you both.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of Max Keiser and Stacy Herbert. Keiser Report Summer Solutions. Thanks to special guest Jim Kunstler of Kunstler.com. Until next time, bye, y'all.